So the presidential line of succession is the president, the vice president, and then to the Speaker of the House. But it doesn't necessarily take incapacitation for the 25th Amendment to be applied. The framers wrote a succession mechanism into the Constitution, but it was a little vague, so Congress rewrote it into the 25th Amendment in the 1960s. The 25th Amendment covers several situations. An easy case is Section 3, where the president voluntarily but temporarily transfers power to the vice president. It's been used before. For example, Presidents Reagan and W. Bush transferred power to the VP while they underwent surgical procedures. More complicated is Section 4, the involuntary transfer of power, where the president isn't involved in the decision. It's initiated by the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, who transfer in writing to Congress their opinion that the president is unable to continue his duties. Once they do that, the vice president automatically takes over. It's never been invoked, and it's designed to be difficult to invoke. Remember, the vice president and the cabinet are likely to be loyal to the president, so they will not invoke this provision lightly. Now, the easy case under Section 4 would be something like the president in a coma. No one could honestly oppose the idea of transferring power in that situation. The harder case is pretty much anything less than a presidential coma, where the president is awake or he recovers and wants his power back. A conscious president can come back and say in writing or a tweet that his inability has passed. The VP keeps the presidential power for up to 4 days, and he and the cabinet can disagree in writing to Congress. But otherwise, the president gets the power back.
President Trump is suffering mild symptoms of COVID-19. His age, sex, and weight status increase his risk of developing a severe case of the virus. We're going to bring in NBC senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres. Dr. John, the president is 74 years old. He is a male. He's technically overweight. Why are those such critical factors in a COVID-19 diagnosis?
And Guy, there are a variety of risk factors that put somebody at the higher risk or higher chance of having complications because of COVID-19, the disease itself, and for a variety of different reasons. But some of the ones that particularly affect the president, anybody 65 and above, they're at a higher risk of developing complications, mainly because of immune system issues. Their immune system isn't as strong as it used to be when they were younger. He's 74, so he's definitely in that category. The other one is males tend to have worse outcomes than females do. It's not that much worse, but they do tend to have worse outcomes. And so he's in that category as well. And then the third category, which is possibly the category that might put him at the greatest risk, is obesity. In June of this year, 4 months ago, he had a physical. On that physical, he was 244 pounds, 6'3". If you run the numbers through a BMI, body mass index calculator, that's 30.5. 30 and above is considered obese. So granted, he's at the bottom part of the obesity scale there, but it still puts him in the obesity category. The reason it's a risk factor for coronavirus is a couple different things. One, because of the overweightness, it causes their lung function to not be as robust as people who aren't obese. Number two, their immune system doesn't work as well because of the weight. And number three, they also tend to have clotting problems. And if you look at what the issues they have when they start having complications from coronavirus, oftentimes it's breathing issues. Again, the lung compromise. It's immune system issues that attack the body. They have that as well because of obesity. And then it's blood clotting that causes problems. So he's got that going on as well. So those three things, his age, the fact he's a male, and the obesity are basically red flags that he needs to be watched very carefully because he, like you said, has started with mild symptoms. We want to make sure those don't progress to moderate, even more importantly, to severe, Gotti.
And those mild symptoms, we have to imagine that this was caught right at the onset. He's got the best medical care probably on planet Earth. And we've learned a lot about the virus over the last 6, 7, 8 months now. What do you think the treatments are going to be like for the president at the White House?
So I think part of the treatment are going to be what we call supportive care, meaning just making sure, constantly checking up on him, making sure he's hydrated, making sure he's eating when he can eat, when he feels like eating, making sure he's getting plenty of rest. Those things we know we need to recover when we can take care of ourselves at home. But on top of that, my guess is they're also looking at therapeutics. And the one in particular they're probably looking at is remdesivir. It's an antiviral. And what it has been shown to do is it actually cuts down on the symptoms and cuts down on the length of illness itself. And so getting that early on, and I would not be surprised if he's already started to get that, could be an important step towards helping him recover. On top of that, convalescent plasma. If he starts getting sicker, convalescent plasma might be a tool they pull out to try and help him get his infection under control. Monoclonal antibodies, which haven't been approved yet, they are in clinical trials. It might be something to use as well. The one thing they're probably not going to use are steroids unless he gets to a critical condition, because steroids early on can actually make things worse. Once he gets to a critical condition, they're the one medicine has been shown to be life-saving when it comes to COVID-19, Gotti.
And Dr. John, there are a lot of people in the president's inner circle. We already know that the First Lady and Hope Hicks have tested positive for the coronavirus. What protocols should the White House be taking right now to prevent the further spread?
So they need to be very careful, and that's the contact tracing that you've been talking about, of seeing who is around him, who is around Hope Hicks, who's around anybody that might become positive with coronavirus, and quarantine them if they can. Now, the CDC actually last month changed their criteria for quarantining. Up until now, it's been you have to quarantine for 14 days if you're exposed to coronavirus, meaning you were within 6 feet of somebody who's positive for coronavirus for at least 15 minutes, or you came in physical contact, like you hugged them. Then in that case, you need to quarantine for 14 days, which means you really need to be out of the public. But the one thing they put in there last month are for critical workers. And it's intended for workers who need to keep the infrastructure of the country going. And in that case, they say, as long as you do certain things, then you can go ahead and go back to work. But it's possible that they're considering the people that are around the president critical workers as well. And so they might fall into this category. They basically need a pre-test, and that could either be the tests they're getting for coronavirus or things as simple as temperature checks. They need to go ahead and monitor themselves every day. If they start getting symptoms, let somebody know. They need to wear masks. They need to social distance, and they need to clean their environment. They're doing all these except for the mask wearing part. And so that's the part they need to ramp up in order to keep everybody safe, Gotti.
Good advice for the White House and good advice for the rest of us as well. Thanks so much, Dr. John.
You bet.
So how is the economy actually doing under President Trump? NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce takes a close look.
When President Trump took office in 2016, he inherited a pretty good economy, and the growth continued for 3 years. But the pandemic brought that to a screeching halt. So where does the economy stand now? President Trump will often use the stock market as evidence that the economy is great.
The best economy, best stock market.
And it's true. It's been a good market throughout his presidency. The S&P 500 reached a high in February. Once the pandemic hit, it plummeted. Since then, it's recovered and even surpassed previous highs. But it's important to note that even this solid stock run has not been record-breaking, as Trump often claims. Returns through this point in his presidency have been better than recent presidents Reagan, Carter, and George W. Bush, but not as good as Clinton and Obama. And remember, the stock market is not the economy. So what do other indicators say? If we look at the change in GDP year over year, we can get a sense of economic growth. During Trump's first 3 years in office, the economy grew an average of 2.5% each year. That is a slight improvement over Obama's second term at 2.3% a year. But 2020 will surely drag that number way down. The latest data showed the economy contracted a historically unprecedented 31% in the second quarter due to the pandemic. We're clearly recovering, but the Federal Reserve still estimates the economy will shrink 3.5% this year. Another indicator is how many jobs were added to the economy. Through the first 3 years of Trump's presidency, jobs were being added at a pretty consistent and strong pace of 182,000 jobs a month, a similar rate to the recovery from the Great Recession. Of course, the pandemic has been devastating, and while jobs are being added back at a historically strong clip, total employment is not yet back to the levels we saw when Trump took office. Another way to look at the labor market is unemployment rates. In January 2017, it was 4.7%. And for most of his presidency, it continued on a downward trajectory. Just before the pandemic, the unemployment rate fell to a low of 3.5% until it skyrocketed to 14.7% in April.
Since then, the rate has come down to 7.9%.
This trend is similar for Black Americans, with higher unemployment rates. One of Trump's big campaign promises in 2016 was reviving American manufacturing. And manufacturing output did see a big boost in 2018 after Trump passed his tax cuts, but it plateaued in 2019. And 2020 has been a disaster. The second quarter has output levels not seen since 2009 during the Great Recession. Employment in the sector has also dropped to levels below when Trump started his presidency. In 2016, Trump promised to slash the national debt, but after he took office, it continued to climb in 2018 and 2019. As the federal government grapples with the pandemic response, 2020 is expected to have the highest debt as a share of the economy since World War II. It doesn't take an economist to realize that things are not in a particularly good place right now. But Trump continues to poll well on the economy despite the numbers. The question is, are we rebounding at a rate that makes people feel confident as they head to the polls?
When Obama asked the public to re-elect him in 2012, the unemployment rate stood at 7.8%.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.